So we get a lot of requests to share the recording after the webinar. So we're recording. Okay. So we'll get started. So very warm welcome to everyone. So hello, I'm Swati, and I'm a project manager with Season Watch. Season Watch is a citizen science and an education program where we work to generate an interest and love for trees in people and in society at large. So, as part of that, we host many webinars, and this webinar is known as the Fascinating Tree Tales. So, I welcome you all to the very first in the series today. And I'm joined also by my teammate, Dr. Geeta Ramaswamy, who heads the Season Watch program. And it is our great pleasure to welcome you all to the webinar series. And in today's webinar, we have a very special speaker with us who will be talking about one of the most requested topics in Season Watch, the invasives. Our speaker today is Dr. Ankila Hiremath. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Ankila. Dr. Ankila is a plant ecologist. Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Dr. Ankila.
Hi.
Yeah, so I'll give a brief intro before we get started. Dr. Ankila is a plant ecologist and she's currently an adjunct senior fellow at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and Environment, also known as A3. Her work spans over several decades and has been in forests and woodland savannas of the Bihar Hills in Karnataka, across Nilgiris in Tamil Nadu, and in the bunny grasslands of Kutch. And much of her work has involved working with invasive plants, especially Lantana camara and Prosopis. Before I hand it over to Dr. Ankila, I request all participants to post any questions that you have for our speaker in the chat box at any time, and we will take them up after the presentation. With that, I welcome you, Dr. Ankila, once again, and I hand it over to you for this much awaited talk. Welcome.
Thank you, Swati, for that, and thank you very much for having me here. I look forward to interacting with this large and diverse group from across the country. Let me just share my screen. Um, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Oh, okay, okay. There we go. So should I begin?
Yes, all good.
All right. Uh, well, so when we talk about invasive alien species, and as Swati mentioned, there seems to be a lot of interest in invasive alien species, but I've found that there's also tends to be a lot of confusion about what we consider invasive alien species. And so before before going very far, I want to spend a little bit of time to make sure that we're all on the same page and we have the same understanding of a number of the terms that are used fairly interchangeably. People talk about introduced species, people talk about alien species, people talk about non-native species and invasive species, and often, we mean the same thing, but actually they're quite different. So with that, um, oh, okay. So with that, I thought I'd start with a group of flowering trees. I believe a lot of you are season watchers, and um, you record tree flowering phenologies across the country. So these are probably species that many of you are familiar with. And I wanted to request that you take maybe half a minute and put in the chat box which of these species you think are uh, either native or non-native. Don't try to make two groups, that will probably take too much time, but any one group, if you could put that in the chat box, that would be great. Thanks. So,
Okay, I'll read out the responses. So we have Vilaiti Kikar is non-native, Jacaranda is introduced, Gulmohar non-native, Gulmohar and Jacaranda non-native. So a lot of people saying Gulmohar non-native.
okay,
Neltuma, someone says Neltuma. Imli is non-native. Cassia fistula native. Barna is native, and Gulmohar non-native, Imli non-native. So we have a lot of responses for Gulmohar being non-native,
right, right.
and some for Imli being native, some for Imli being non-native. Yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. So moving on. So oops, I'm not good at changing slides. Just a second, I'll figure it out. Yeah, so I expected that perhaps this is the way it would fall out for a lot of you, and a lot of you put Gulmohar in the non-native, and also Neltuma, I think, was mentioned. I didn't hear mention of any of the others, but there are several other non-natives as well. Um, Imli, I am surprised that a lot of you had it as non-native, and you're right. Imli actually is non-native, but for many of us, we tend to think of it as native because it's been in India a very, very long time, about almost 2,000 years. Hmm? So just moving on. So this would be if I were to further categorize these species. Um, I think someone said Amaltas was native. Someone mentioned Barna, so also Palash. Sorry, I'm using the Hindi common names. There are other names in other parts of the country, and I'm not familiar with all of them. Imli is in a special category of its own because we tend to think of it as many of us tend to think of it as native because it's been around so long. All the others are non-native or alien. Um, and amongst those, you have a lot of you mentioned Gulmohar. And I don't think I heard anyone mention Jacaranda, but that's also introduced. It's a South American tree. Both Gulmohar and Jacaranda are introduced ornamental trees. Sometimes one might also consider them, people refer to them as exotic trees also. And then the other three non-natives, the black wattle, the paper mulberry, and the Vilaiti kikar, or the Neltuma juliflora, would be considered invasive. Just want to spend half a minute on explaining why Imli is in this category of its own here. It's what biologists or botanists would term an archaeophyte, which literally means old plant, as opposed to some of the other non-native plants that are considered neophytes or new plants. And what distinguishes them is the timing of introduction. So anything that has come in after the year 1500 is considered a new plant. Anything prior to that is considered an old plant. And the significance of the year 1500 is really because it kind of forms the watershed of what is known as the Great Columbian Exchange. So when Christopher Columbus, quote unquote, discovered the Americas, that was followed by large-scale European settlement of the Americas, and Europeans took with them a number of domesticated plants, animals, even diseases to the Americas, and in turn brought back a lot of what they considered were potentially useful or at least to them interesting plants and animals from the Americas back to Europe and then to European colonies across the world. So this was a period of great churning, or the beginning of a period of great churning, which has just continued on into the present. So just as an example, the Europeans, when they settled their colonies, they tried to enrich or from their perspective, improve the local flora and fauna by introducing species that they considered useful to them. So, they took songbirds to various oceanic islands. They took cats, dogs, rats. They took a number of different plants, and they took, fish and other game animals. Um, and in order to do this, there were these special societies set up in Europe. There were things called acclimation societies and agricultural and horticultural societies whose job was the introduction of useful plants and animals to these other parts of the world. So this is an example from India. There was something called the Agricultural and Horticultural Society, and this was a volume of recommendations received by the Agricultural and Horticultural Society of India, uh, and which starts out in its introduction talking about how uh, you know uh, the one of the roles of the British Empire was to carry out this grand experiment across India by introducing potentially useful and desirable plants from other parts of the world. And in one of the recommendations received was that every variety of tree and plant that is potentially adapted to India's climate should be introduced to India. This was like this great colonial enterprise. And many of those plants have gone on to become invasive today. So moving on from there, then, before I go any further, I think it's also useful to pause and talk about what are the formal definitions of invasive alien species. Uh, and I offer you two definitions. One proposed by the Convention on Biological Diversity. This is from the early 2000s, I think 2002, uh, which talks about invasive species as being introduced and as being threats to biological diversity. So, uh, in fact, the Convention on Biological Diversity went so far as to say that invasive species were the second biggest threat to biological diversity after habitat fragmentation. A more recent definition proposed by a body called the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. This definition was proposed in 2019, so fairly recently. Again, talks about invasive alien species as plants and animals that have been introduced from elsewhere by human agency. But it expands the idea of impacts beyond just threats to biological diversity. It talks about invasive species having impacts also on food security, on human health, and human well-being. But what I want to draw your attention to is that both definitions, the two things in common are that invasive alien species are non-native, they're introduced, and they have detrimental impacts. And this will come up as we go along. Okay, so I'll spend a little bit of time at the outset now talking about different types of invasive alien species impacts, citing examples from India. Uh, I'll draw upon examples of three very well-known invasive alien plants in India, the most well-known of which is Lantana camara, and I'm sure all of you are familiar with Lantana. It's known by different names in different languages, and the one that I prefer most of all is the name Banmara, which is used in parts of North India and also in Nepal. And it clearly kind of indicates how people view this plant, that it basically is a destroyer of forests. So most of my examples on the impacts of lantana come from the Biligiri Rangan Hills, which is it's a tiger sanctuary in the southern part of Karnataka. It kind of sits on the Karnataka-Tamil Nadu border. And if you look at that map in the corner of your screen, everything that is shaded ochre or rust orange is some form of woodland savanna vegetation. So open treed landscapes with a grassy understory. And this is what the picture also shows you. And this is a picture from about 2001. Uh, Today it would be very difficult to find this kind of open savanna vegetation in this landscape, because most of it looks like this. This is Lantana camara in the BR Hills, and it has pretty much invaded the understories of all that open vegetation that I showed you. Uh, uh, the BR Hills is fairly unique in having this long-term survey at this large scale. I mean, there have been other long-term studies in forest vegetation also, and Dr. Geeta Ramaswamy has been part of one such study in Mudumalai Tiger Reserve, not far from here. But at this scale, at the scale of this entire tiger reserve, which is 540 square kilometers, this is probably one of the few such studies in India. And what I'd like you to see is, the three maps. They they are surveys from 1997, 2008, and 2018, so about 10 years apart. And just pay attention to the change in colors across those maps. And you can see that, they go from uh, a lot of empty boxes and fairly lightly shaded boxes in 97 to pretty much all the grids being full in by 2018, and all of them being shaded quite dark, which is an indication of a much higher density of lantana. So lantana spread increases over this 20-year period, and lantana density has also increased markedly over this 20-year period. And if we look at the number of individuals of lantana that the survey tracked, you see that in 1997, lantana was only 5% of all the woody plants in this landscape. By 2018, it's 50% of the vegetation in this landscape. So like a tenfold increase in just a 20-year period. And this increase has been at the cost of the native tree vegetation. So lantana is kind of displacing the native trees. Uh, the other thing that lantana does in this landscape, which took me by surprise the first time I saw it, was that one tends to think of lantana as a shrub, but given the opportunity, it can also behave like a climber and clamber up tree trunks. And so when fires occur in this landscape, you get what are called canopy fires. Lantana forms what people call ladder fuels, allowing fire to climb up into the canopy, which is very, very damaging. Previously, with the open understory, with the grass layer, fires, when they occurred, would have been fairly cool fires that did not do damage to the vegetation. But when fires like this occur, they can be very, very damaging. Another impact of lantana has been on wildlife in these kinds of invaded habitats. Lantana is not palatable for native herbivores, elephants, gore, various deer. So animals have to come out of the forest and raid crop fields uh, in search of food. And in the BR Hills, the local indigenous community, the Soligas, have had to change their cropping pattern because of repeated damage to crops by wild herbivores. Another thing which we have not observed in the BR Hills, thankfully, but this has been reported from central India, and recently the biologist Ninad Mungi uh, spoke about what he termed as lantana tigers. So, because these landscapes have become fairly depauperate of wild herbivores, tigers are coming out of these landscapes and preying upon livestock, which is again a significant issue in um, human inhabited landscapes bordering these lantana invaded forests. In the BR Hills, we found that lantana also affects livelihoods of forest-dependent communities, because with the spread of lantana at the expense of native vegetation, um, it it has suppressed the regeneration of important NTFP trees like amla that people have historically depended upon for livelihoods. And earlier people thought that it was overharvest of fruits like amla that had led to their decline, but studies have shown that it's not overharvest, it's the spread of lantana that has led to decline of amla. Another very, very, I guess, unexpected initially, not if you think about it, but when one first encountered it, uh, it was rather surprising. But people talk about how these forests have become more dangerous places because of the lantana. So, the earlier open type of vegetation, people could walk through and you would get, views of the forest to long distances. But now with the dense lantana in the undergrowth, you can't see very far. So the chances of encounters with dangerous wildlife have gone up. And I don't know if you see in the middle of that photograph, that's the back of an elephant. This is a picture taken from up in a tree, looking down on this dense undergrowth with an elephant walking through it. And if you were on the ground, you would probably not see this elephant. And because these forests have now become more dangerous places for people who have, lived in these landscapes for generations, it has altered their relationship with these landscapes also. So, because of the lantana, there's reduced availability of food plants that were traditionally harvested and were very important parts of people's cultural identities. A lot of tubers, for example. Uh, Lantana has reduced people's access to sacred sites in the forest, which were traditionally very important to them. And because people are not accessing these landscapes as much, especially the younger generation, that oral transmission of traditional ecological knowledge has also reduced. And we've heard this from people in, the Soliga community in the BR Hills, but these same sentiments have been voiced by other indigenous communities in other parts of the world. So this is a fairly widespread phenomenon. Moving on to another invasive plant. This is Neltuma juliflora. It was earlier known as Prosopis juliflora. And again, it's a very widespread small tree, and therefore, there are names for it in many, many different languages across the country. One of my favorites is Gando Bauer, which is how it is known in Kutch. And Gando Bauer basically means the mad babool. The Desi Bauer is the native babool. Gando Bauer is the babool that's gone mad because of the way it has spread and taken over the landscape. So these are some examples from the Bunny grasslands in Kutch. And for those of you who are not familiar with Bunny's location, Bunny is in the middle of the upper peninsula of Gujarat. The location is in the top left-hand corner there. Bunny was at one time considered the largest contiguous subtropical grassland in Asia. But now the Bunny is more than 50% Prosopis woodland. Uh, so the picture on the left kind of shows you what Bunny probably looked like once upon a time. There are still parts of the Bunny grasslands that look like this, but there are large parts of the Bunny grasslands that look like the photograph on the right. Um, so this has had all kinds of implications. This study was done by somebody called Chetan Mishra, who was looking at how the spread of Prosopis and the change in habitat from grassland to woodland has affected the community of members of the dog family, the canids. And Bunny is unusual in having four members of the dog family living in the same landscape. So you have the golden jackal, the desert fox, the Indian fox, and also the wolf. The wolf occurs at very, very low densities, but he looked at these three species, the jackal and the two foxes, and found that jackals as generalist species, they're not picky about the kind of habitat that they can live in. The jackals have thrived with the spread of the Gandobaur. But the other two species, the desert fox and the Indian fox, which are much more specialized in the kind of habitat that they need, their populations have suffered as a result of the spread of prosopis. Prosopis has also had all kinds of impacts on uh, uh, human communities in this landscape. Banni has traditionally been home to the Maldharis, which are pastoralist communities that have tended the Kankridge cattle on the left and the Banni buffalo. And with the reduction in grassland, obviously, grazing resources have been reduced, and that directly affects people's livelihoods. Um, this has led to other kinds of impacts as well, with reduced grazing resources. It has created conflicts amongst pastoralists, but surprisingly it has also created conflicts between pastoralists and farmers, because apart from the Maldharis of Banni, there are other pastoralist communities like the Rabaris, who are sheep pastoralists, who traverse long distances during the dry season, moving from pastures to farmers' fallows. And earlier, farmers would welcome them onto their fallows. The goats would feed on whatever was growing there, and their droppings would fertilize farmers' fields. Now, farmers do not want the Rabaris to come because their goats are dispersers of Gandobauer. So the goats bring more Gandobauer with them, which then invades farmers' fields. So it's created these conflicts where earlier you had these generational relationships that went back, between pastoralists and farmers. Um, uh, I've so far been talking about the negative impacts of both Lantana and Prosopis, but Prosopis has also had a positive impact in this landscape. So a lot of pastoralists who were negatively affected by the spread of Prosopis and the reduction in grasslands for their livestock have, adapted to using prosopis as a livelihood resource. So, and prosopis charcoal has become a very important part of the local economy. Ah. Okay, moving on to my third example of an invasive plant and its impacts. This is Acacia mearnsii, or the black wattle. And those of you who are familiar with the high elevation shola grasslands of the Western Ghats would be familiar with this species. Which has taken over a lot of the grassland areas. So, the picture on the left is what the Shola grassland mosaic would look like, with Shola forests in the folds of the mountains and everything else being Shola grasslands. But if you look at the picture on the right, you see a lot of the grasslands covered in this dark green vegetation, and a lot of that is black wattle. Uh, these grasslands uh, have naturally been a very important part of this watershed. Grasslands act as sponges, absorbing rainwater and then releasing it slowly into rivers over the course of the dry season. But when you introduce something like black wattle into these grasslands, the hydrological cycle gets completely changed. One reason is because grasslands are green during the wet season and then they dry out during the dry season. So grasses evaporate water for only part of the year. When you have evergreen trees like the black wattle, because they are evergreen, they're evaporating water year round. They also can access a much larger part of the soil. So they're tapping water from a much larger volume of soil. So they're overall drying out the soil a lot more. And people have measured that the water that is being absorbed and then released from these grasslands, where these grasslands are invaded by black wattle, there's much less water now being released. So if and they've measured the water storage in dams like the Upper Bhavani in the Nilgiris and found that the storage capacity has been reduced by about 10%, which is a very significant number, since a lot of people depend on that as a source of water. Another impact of this black wattle has been that it has changed the way people perceive these landscapes. And this is Siddharth Krishnan writes about this and how the Toda pastoralist communities who have traditionally inhabited these high elevation grasslands talk about the impact of these invasive species that they have rendered these grasslands, uh, you know, uh, hostile and predatory landscapes, again for similar reasons as I mentioned when talking about lantana and how it had made the forest much more dangerous, because tigers and leopards can shelter in these wooded grasslands and attack buffaloes, and people are also worried about being attacked after dark. So another rather unexpected impact of invasive species on people's well-being. So having talked about, given you various examples of how invasive plants can affect both native biodiversity and human well-being, I want to just briefly also move on to talking about how biologists, uh, you know, think about invasion. So just very simple invasion biology. Um, I want to I want to make 2 points here. One is that not every introduced species necessarily becomes invasive, and two, that invasion is not an event. It's actually a long process. And so between arriving from from elsewhere, from being introduced to a new environment and becoming invasive, a species has to go through various different types of filters or overcome different types of barriers to become invasive, and not all plants would do that. So the first filter is the dispersal or getting to a new place, and that involves being transported from elsewhere and being introduced, and that can be both a deliberate activity. So a lot of plants, for example, have been brought as sources of fuel wood, or as ornamental plants, or as sources of fruits, uh, but other plants have arrived accidentally. So something like Parthenium is thought to have arrived with imported wheat in the 1950s, when India was still very reliant on importing food grains. And so you can have deliberate introductions or accidental introductions. But once something is introduced, it needs to then pass through an environmental filter. So it needs to develop the adaptations to the local environment to be able to establish outside of cultivation. So if something is growing in your garden, you're looking after it, you're giving it the right amount of water or nutrients, or giving it the right light environment that it needs. For it to be able to escape from a garden and grow in the wild, it needs to have developed adaptations to the local environment, otherwise it won't survive. So that's the second filter, if you like. And the third filter is to be able to develop alliances with local animals, if you like, that allow it to spread. So for example, something like uh, prosopis or gandobauer is spread by a number of different livestock. Buffaloes spread it, goats spread it, camels spread it, even wild herbivores like nilgai spread it, be able to become widespread. And so there are these three different filters, if you like, that invasive that a plant would need to pass through successfully to become invasive. And rule of thumb is that only about 10% of introduced species actually end up becoming invasive. Looking at it over time, um, biologists talk about something called the invasion curve. And what I want to call attention to is the fact that, between introduction and becoming a widespread invasive, um, there's 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 a long time when uh, a plant might be almost unnoticeable. It just there just exists in small numbers, and then it suddenly takes off and spreads. And this is not just a theoretical pattern. One has seen this with plants in the wild. So this is an example again from Lantana camara, which is probably the best studied invasive plant in India. This was work done by the late Ramesh Kannan, who collected herbarium records of Lantana from different parts from across the Western Ghats over a 200-year period. Lantana was introduced to India in 1809. And so if you see, in the first 50-year period, 1800 to 1850, there's only one record of Lantana in the Western Ghats. In the next 50-year period, 1850 to 1900, there seem to be two or three more records. The next 100-year period, quite a few more. And in the following 50-year period, sorry, many more records of Lantana across the entire Western Ghats. And if you put it on that kind of graph again, as the one that I had shown you for the invasion curve, you see Lantana doing a similar thing. In the first 80 years or so, there's hardly any Lantana across this landscape. And then suddenly it takes off and it's everywhere. And that's very, very typical of how invasive species behave. But this lag period, this time when invasive species are kind of very, very rare before they take off, that period is called a lag phase. And that can vary from species to species. So for Lantana, what I just showed you, it took about 80 years before it just exploded across the Western Ghats. For something like Parthenium, which must be very familiar to most people, it's called Gajar Ghas or Congress grass, which, as I said, came in accidentally, we think, with PL 480 wheat in the 1950s. Reports in the popular press about Parthenium spread and how it was affecting people, the Parthenium pollen causes respiratory allergies. So already by the early 1980s, there were widespread reports of Parthenium having become a problem. So in Parthenium's case, it only took about 30 years for it to become widespread and problematic. And probably because Parthenium is a short-lived plant, it's a short-lived perennial or annual. So it reproduces quickly and regenerates quickly. So if it needed to build up adaptations to the local environment, it would have happened much more quickly, much more quicker than in Lantana's case. Senna spectabilis is another interesting example. Those of you who have traveled through the Nilgiris or are from the Nilgiris region would be familiar with Senna, which in the last 10, 15 years has become very, very noticeable across forests of Wayanad, Mudumalai, Bandipur. This is a small tree with these brilliant yellow flowers, and it was brought into Wayanad in the 1980s, I think. And by 2020, it had become very, very widespread. So it took only about 40 years to spread, which you would not expect with a long-lived tree. Parthenium is a short-lived herb, and you expect things to happen faster. With a long-lived tree, you would expect it to have taken more time. But in the case of Senna, it formed a dispersal alliance with elephants, and elephants travel long distances. So elephants really facilitated a very rapid spread of Senna. So, what are the other kinds of things that make invasive plants so successful? I've talked about, having alliances with native species, like elephants in the case of Senna, various domestic and wild herbivores in the case of Prosopis. In some cases, invasive plants have alliances with people also, and prosopis is another good example because it grows so well in arid regions. It was also widely planted by people across a lot of the arid parts of the country. Uh, other kinds of characteristics that favor a plant becoming invasive is that it might not have any natural enemies in the region where it's introduced. So it can allocate more energy to becoming bigger, and not have to allocate energy to defending itself against uh, enemies. And that's been seen, documented with some invasive plants, not in India but in other parts of the world. Some invasive plants show what is called allelopathy. So they produce chemicals that they exude from their roots, and that can be toxic to neighboring plants. So they can suppress uh, neighboring plants in these new environments that they're introduced into. A lot of invasive plants have they're very fast growing, and they produce large numbers of seeds, so that encourages their rapid spread. Many of them are able to also reproduce vegetatively, which means that they can reproduce from little fragments of roots or stems. They don't need seeds to reproduce. And in a lot of cases, during that lag time when they're accumulating adaptations to the new environment, they can end up becoming more vigorous in the introduced uh, uh, areas than they were in their native range. And I want to use this example of lantana again. On the right is a picture again from the BR Hills, where you see lantana in the understory. On the left is a picture that Dr. Geeta Ramaswamy took of lantana in its native Brazil. And it's almost impossible to see the lantana in its native habitat. She helped me by pointing out where it was, and if you look really closely, those red circles circle lantana flowers on this little lantana shrub. So, just by way of saying that in in their introduced ranges, when invasive plants become, introduced plants become invasive, they can also become very, very vigorous and quite unlike what they were in their native ranges. So just very quickly, I want to touch upon just, invasive plants and management. Uh, if you go back to that invasion curve, uh, once invasive species become very widespread, that's when we start to notice them, and that's when management becomes very, very difficult. And our only options are to try and contain them locally and to control them and restore native habitat, but one can only do this at a local scale. And there are some very good examples of this from different parts of the country. The Rao Jodha Desert Park in Jodhpur is an example where Pradeep Krishan has gone and removed prosopis and restored desert vegetation. NCF's work in Valparai, where they've removed lantana and have been working on restoring forests, is another example. But in many cases, if something works in one part of the country, it doesn't necessarily work in another part. And that's one of the challenges of this kind of management. One has to evolve suitable management practices based on the local conditions. Uh, Also, one tends to be in a hurry. You want to remove invasives and restore in a few years. These things have taken decades, in some cases centuries, to invade. And I think one needs to recognize that restoration likewise requires time and patience. And in some cases, like in the Bunny, where prosopis has had both negative and positive impacts, one has to take that into account as well when addressing management and restoration, because there are large parts of the community that no longer wants prosopis removed. So, how does one approach that is also a question. Uh, if you look at the early phase of invasive species spread, that lag phase, when invasive plants are not very widespread, that offers a chance for more effective management if one is able to detect these plants before they become widespread and you can even attempt to eradicate them. But we tend not to be looking out for plants at that stage. And I wanted to just mention that, what can we, as people who are people who are interested in plants, it's, one thing is to recognize the ways in which plants come into the country, and the ornamental plant introduction is one very, very important pathway of plant introductions. So, this is a book from the 1960s on garden flowers, and Ageratum cornizoides is talked about as a wonderful species to use in gardens. And this is just, 50 years ago. Now it's a widespread invasive plant. So we tend to seek out the exotic plants because we want to have new plants for our gardens or our parks. This is a newfound favorite for a lot of municipal gardeners, at least in Delhi. This creeping daisy, it's planted in every park that you go to. So this is something to watch out for, that, or to be mindful of, that by seeking out newer, more exotic plants, we're in a sense uh, encouraging the introduction of new plants and potentially new invasives. Finally, I just wanted to mention, since a lot of you are citizen scientists, I also wanted to mention that another way to, help with invasive species management is to help monitor invasive plants across the country, because then managers can be made aware of plants that are starting to spread and manage them before they become very, very widespread. This is on iNaturalist, and encourage people to join if interested. This is an initiative housed out of the Keystone Foundation. And then I'll end by just putting up two resources about invasive plants that may be of interest to some of you. This is a very, very comprehensive database of alien plants across India. It was a very in-depth, comprehensive exercise to collate invasive plant information, both from different databases in India and globally. And the link there will take you to this Indian alien flora information database. Uh, this is also a resource that might be of interest. This is a publication by Nature Conservation Foundation and the Biodiversity Collaborative that talks about common invasive plants across India. And with that, I'll stop and take any questions.
Thank you, Ankila, for that fascinating talk. Really, for really taking us through the details, different species, and how complicated really the entire issue is. What we think of exotic, how that enters and can also kind of and also impacts what is native, not only the species and the plants, but also the relationships of people with the landscapes that you talked about in the BR Hills, and the relationship between
I think Swati's network has gone. Okay, so I'll continue on behalf of Susan now. Oh,
Hi.
she's back. Yeah,
Oh,
Swati
hi.
is back.
Oh, okay. Where was I? I said a bunch of stuff. So, okay.
Yeah, I think
Um,
it's summarized. Yeah, we heard the
oh,
summary.
okay, sure. So I'll go ahead and read the questions that came in chat for you. Okay. So uh, Manjunatha has a couple of questions. The first one is whether center of origin and center of diversity are used for plants and only, or does it also apply to trees? And the second question is, has there been any effort on the introduction of plants, any certification in India based on the excellent study presented, and that has led to any regulatory changes?
Thank you, Manjunatha. Yeah, I think I don't know what exactly you mean by center of origin and center of diversity, but I think we recognize where individual plants are native to, and I think there is a recognition of certain plant families, and which are the centers of diversity for those plant families. I don't know if that addresses your question, but for example, the rhododendrons, there is a center of diversity in the northeastern Himalayas, Sikkim and southern China, for example. And if you look up something like the Q Plants of the World online database, which is available online, for each plant you can see which area of the world, which part of the world they're native to, and which parts of the world they've been introduced to the extent that is known. In terms of, I hope that answered your question. I'm not sure if I did.
Yes, yes. In
Okay,
fact,
okay,
I'm a plant breeder and an
okay.
agricultural scientist by
Yeah,
profession. We do have this for the regular crops, and
right,
you are so much right on Parthenium. In fact, when we introduced for the PL 480, Parthenium was brought as a plant. My question was, when we introduce some species, we usually introduce beneficial species. So we have a regulatory issue, phytosanitary
right,
certificate. So your excellent study now should be fed into the regulatory system so that we can pass some law. Like we have an X number of diseases, we have X, but there is no. I have trained many phytosanitary certificates. I have worked in Thailand. I have imported lots of sugarcane varieties from different parts of the world, but there is nothing specified there for testing it for invasiveness. So
right, right.
that's my question. I think that could be a
Yeah.
very interesting thing based on your excellent in-depth study over a period of almost 2 centuries. It could really bring about changes in the regulatory issues. I think for me.
No, absolutely. I think thanks for that point. And you know, a recent global assessment on invasive species by IPBES
Oh,
found that
okay.
across the world, I think very, very few countries actually have legislation that is specific to invasive species, even though many, many countries now recognize this as a problem. And
Right.
India is amongst those countries that doesn't yet have invasive
Right.
species specific legislation. We do have
Right.
things like the plant quarantine order and various different schedules on
Absolutely.
it,
Yeah.
but those were framed in the context of agricultural imports. So we have lists of species not to be imported because they may be hosts for other disease causing
Correct.
organisms. We don't yet have lists of invasive species not to be imported, but there's currently an expert committee of the National Biodiversity Authority. You may have read about it. That
Yes.
I think one of its mandates is to try and come up with these kinds of regulations. So hopefully it's on the cards.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doc. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, madam.
Hello.
Hello.
Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Hello. Yeah, yeah. Madam, I was calling from Kolkata. Actually, it was an informative session, wonderful session to stage. Actually, the thing is, I wanted
uh,
to know about the specific thing that you told about. Hello, hello,
Your voice
Hi,
is breaking.
Abhishek.
hello. Can I
Hi,
proceed?
Mr. Abhishek. Hi, Mr. Abhishek. Your voice is breaking. I request you to post your
Okay.
question in the chat because we already have a few questions lined up. So we'll go in that order. So once we are done with the questions that have been posted already, we'll come to you. So I request you to post. Yes,
Okay.
please do that. Thank you, thank you.
Okay.
So I'll go to the next question, which is by. By Ramya, and that is Prosopis cineraria is a non-native. It is also a useful tree, isn't it? So I think there are quite a few questions like that. About uh, the use of many of the non-native species and their importance. So I don't. Yeah.
Well, just in the case of Prosopis cineraria, it's actually a native. In fact, it's a sacred tree to the Bishnoi community in Rajasthan. And yes, it has many, many uses. But you're absolutely right that there are many non-native species and some of them invasive species that people have evolved uses for. And I think that's not surprising. A lot of these species were brought in intentionally because they were useful. Even Prosopis juliflora was brought in as a fuel wood species for arid regions like parts of Rajasthan and Andhra Pradesh where you don't have you know abundant trees that can serve as sources of fuel wood. So I think, when it comes to managing these species, I think one has to take into account the fact that there are communities that have become dependent on them, and I think one needs to look at the net impacts of the negative impacts and the positive impacts. But you cannot just go in and remove these invasive species if people have a dependence on them. I think unless one finds alternatives.
Okay. Thanks, Ankila. So now there are a couple of questions about the trees, avenue trees that get planted in cities like Jacaranda and Rain Tree and so on, and these trees being used in landscaping, and how are they is there any impact in the urban environment, and what do we know about that?
Again, there are a lot of our avenue trees that are introduced, and I think that's again a legacy of colonial planting that has just carried on into the present. We have a number of native trees across the country that are very, very attractive and could also be used in ornamental planting, but have not been widely used so far. But having said that, I don't want this to sound like all non-natives are bad and all natives are good, a kind of very, very simplistic thing. But it is true that certain non-natives have a potential to become invasive, and I think when introducing non-natives, some countries carry out something called a weed risk assessment, where based on the biological characteristics of species, they can assign a certain degree of risk to their introduction, based on their reproductive characteristics, their growth rates. And so, unfortunately, we don't yet have any such thing in India, but I think there is a need for that, so that we're a little more cautious about how we introduce species.
Can you say something specific about these species, like rain tree? Because currently it's being used as an excuse to cut down large mature rain trees, saying that they are invasive, and they do regenerate naturally on the river bank, for example. But is it a good idea to cut down the mature trees?
Oh, I wasn't aware of this, that rain trees are being cut down because they're considered invasive. I'm not aware that rain trees are considered. I mean, at least biologists have not yet included rain trees as part of.
So there is a Facebook post
Okay.
saying that they are,
Okay.
and so if you ask AI is very sure that they are invasive because I guess it uses the Facebook post. And
Okay, my ignorance here, I'll need to look it up.
yeah, similarly with Gliricidia, the Gliricidia are being uprooted on the Pune hills because they are considered to be invasive. So, about these two species in particular, I wanted to know.
Hi, Jayashree. I'm very sorry. I'll have to interrupt here. Very sorry.
Sorry.
We're out of time, but we do, and there are many questions. If we have just a couple more minutes, Ankila, I would ask Mr. Abhishek, because he wanted to ask a question. So if maybe you can ask your question now, Abhishek, and we may
Yes, madam. Yes, madam.
take up the others later,
Yes,
Ankila.
madam. Yes.
Um,
Yeah,
yes, please
yeah, I'm here.
do so.
This time,
Yes,
am I
please.
audible completely? Am I audible clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Like Jayashree madam pointed out right now that the cutting of the rain trees, it's a thing which is happening here in Kolkata as well for the annexation of the tree, for the roadsides, for the rain trees are being cutted down. But that's a different context. What I am intent to know right now is that the community-based management of the invasive non-native species that you told about. There are cases where the trees, the Gandu Bower. Okay, so they are being in utilization and in spaces with the communities in the arid zones, and they are being used, considered as sacred. That's a different case. But I'm talking about a particular case where these communities might use them as their
I think we have lost
Lost.
audio again. Okay. So, since we are already out of time, there are a lot of comments and many more questions, Ankila. So, clearly, there's a lot of interest, and people really want to know so much more in relation to very specific species and very specific issues related to specific species too. So it really looks like a topic of great interest. So I will collate the questions and the comments, and we'll see, have maybe a Q&A prepared and shared with everyone. So
Sure.
thank you so much for doing this today, and thank you everyone for attending with so much enthusiasm. So with that, we'll close today's session, and we'll see you all. I'll send a recording, and we'll see you all next time for another fascinating tree tale talk. So thank you so much, Ankila, for
Thank,
this
thanks.
talk,
My
for taking
pleasure.
his time. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Goodbye. Have a nice day. Rest of the weekend. Bye.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Swati. I'm ending the meeting.